Ingrid Yang, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to see you again. We've known each other for a little while. I went on one of your awesome retreats a number of years ago. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about what your work life balance looks like.
Sure. So I am a board certified internal medicine physician. I work as a hospital-based physician. I also was an attorney. I practiced intellectual property law. Coming out of college was, an economics major and poli-sci, and thought I was going to go into politics and change the world. And like I said, best laid plans, right? Everything changes. But, I feel like now doing exactly what I'm doing, which is this hybrid of wellness and longevity and, hospital based, very traditional medicine is this perfect way to make the biggest impact and change the world in the way that I was meant to change the world. So in the end, the whole purpose from thinking I was going to politics really shifted structurally, but from a more philosophical standpoint, stayed the same.
Mm.
I started out doing very traditional corporate law. So I was mergers and acquisitions, securities law, especially with like the economics background. I had already been recruited that fall of my senior year from like a big five consulting company. And then December of that year, they said, we're going to pause all recruitment and we're going to put you back by 6 months, maybe even a year. But you get to keep your $5,000 bonus. And I was like, wow, $5,000, that's so much money. And I was back in the day when I was, in
Yeah.
college.
Yeah.
And so I pivoted and I applied to law school thinking, okay, yeah, I want to go into politics and this is what I want to do with my life. And it was a lot of failure, right? I didn't get into law school the first time, in part because I'd applied late because I, was pivoting. And when I went to law school, I realized I love the study of law, but the practice of law is very different. And you're not the proprietor of justice the way that you think you would be when you practice law, especially again from a philosophical standpoint, theoretical standpoint. So I kind of knew I wasn't going to practice law long term, but knew that it was a skill that I had and that I could and should try to deploy it and try it out. I'd gone through this education, I'd put myself through a lot of debt. So even though people say you can do so much with a law degree, the most obvious thing is to practice law. So I started out doing securities M&A in New York City in a big firm. And something really big, basically my godmother, and she's my paternal aunt, but also she was my godmother. She died pretty suddenly. And it was the first time, I was fairly young, I was 25. And it was the first time that someone close to me died. And it was a big moment in my life where I realized that life is fleeting. You never have any idea what's going to happen and when. Um, and she, in many ways, represented to me this like vibrant life that a woman could live. She was definitely a woman way beyond her years. She was a PhD, she was a scientist, and she worked at Columbia University. And she also, because I was there during my college years and she really took care of me and mentored me, she was in many ways a mother figure to me. And so when that happened, and it was one of those, watershed moments in a young person's life where you realize that you don't have forever. And then you have to live life now and make the choices that you want to have in your life, you want to really move forward in. So I pivoted and I moved back down to North Carolina where went to law school, and I opened a yoga center. When I was in law school, I was teaching a lot of yoga, and there wasn't a lot of yoga there at the time. And I was one of the few yoga teachers in town, and I was the only one that taught like a athletic-based vinyasa class. So when I left, people were like, what are we going to do? I'd started out teaching at the Duke gym with like 8 people, and then it blossomed by the time at the end of my third year to like 70 people per class, and we'd have to turn people away because it was just a very popular style. And people are like, well, what are we going to do? No one else can teach like you. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Sorry. I got to go do this law thing. And, she passed away during the first month of me practicing law. And it was it was such a moment for me where I really took pause and really spent a lot of time mourning that I only thing I could think of is that I had to follow my heart, and my heart was not in law. And I kept working at it for a couple of months, up to a year, and was like, I do have to give this the good old boy try and really see what I can make of it. But the entire time, I kept thinking about what my life was in North Carolina and how fulfilled I felt teaching yoga and how the community had a huge gap. So at the end of that year, I packed my bags up and I moved back to North Carolina to open up a yoga center. I found this space that was on a major street that had no floor, walls, or ceiling. I was basically just booked this space where I figured people might come, and immediately it was successful.
You started doing yoga at a really young age. Is that correct?
I was probably in like my late teens.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And actually, what my first yoga class, I was, type A runner, athlete. I did like 4 varsity sports in college and like, oh, yoga. Like, who does yoga? And my first class I went to, I was like a 24-hour fitness, and I was really frustrated because I couldn't understand what the teacher was saying. She was
It's
using all her
too
hands.
slow.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
it was going slow, and there was like, heavy breathing near me. I was like, this is not. And then I went to I was living in New York City. I was in college in New York City, and I went to another class with my friend because she was like, Ingrid, she put her hand on my shoulder. She's like, you need yoga. I was like, what's that supposed to mean? And then I went with her and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I like it. And then I went to a Jivamukti class, and that style really resonated with me, at least at the time of my life, because it was pretty athletic, incorporating like, inversions and headstands, shoulder stands, etc. So it was much more interesting to me, but it was, again, that was also almost like my gateway drug because, obviously yoga is very multimodal. It's not just about the asana. And it was my foray into the embodiment practices where I was like, wow, I can use my body in a way that is strength building and flexibility building, but also that makes my heart feel safe and relaxed and my nervous system feel easy. I opened and ran my yoga center for a few years, and I realized that I'd done a lot of hard things in my life. And I also really kept my godmother's memory in my heart very closely and thought about her every day and was like, life is short. I have to do what I need to do now. And so I always wanted to be a doctor. And it was interesting because I was across the street from Duke Medical School and Duke Medical Center. And I get a lot of nurses and doctors come in to my classes, and they'd always comment like, wow, you really clearly love anatomy and physiology of the way you teach and the way you speak about the human body. And I said, yeah, I've always wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor, and, it would have been my life dream, but it's too late now. And people looked at me, they're like, you're 26. It's not too late. And I just kind of, wave it off for a couple of months and whatnot. And then eventually I thought about this. I was like, you know what? Why didn't I ever go into medicine? And I realized that I just never was encouraged in that way. I think I'd probably had some kind of intellectual testing when I was a kid, and my parents were like, oh, she's really good at writing and communication, so she's going to be our lawyer. And our son, who's really good at science and math, is going to be our doctor. And there was like predestined.
Mm.
So it really had never occurred to me, and I'd always been like, well, I'm just not talented at that, so I'm just not going to do it. So I started taking some pre-med classes at the local university and, really started getting more interested and started talking to people about it and began really being a little bit louder and prouder. Especially as a 20-something-year-old person, I thought, well, I can't tell anyone because if I get rejected, then they'll judge me and think that I'm a failure and no one's going to like me. But then I remember my brother telling me, like, if you want something, you tell everyone who will listen that you want this. Anyone and everyone that has an ear, you're going to want to tell them about it. And that was the advice that he gave me when I was opening my yoga center, because I was like, how do I go from being a lawyer to becoming a yoga teacher? And especially like coming from an Asian family, my parents were just like livid. And they're like, you're going from being a professional that has the potential to make millions of dollars to like a gym teacher. And I was like, never, totally, this different, but fine. Well, they had their preconceived notions. So I started telling people and everyone that would listen that I was really interested in medicine and I was interested in going into medical school. And so people just kept coming out of the woodwork being like, oh, I know this person in admissions and you should talk to this person. And they also didn't have a straight and narrow path. And so I took classes, I got through prerequisites, I took the MCAT. I was like, I've done a couple of hard things. Maybe I can do this too. And I applied and didn't get in to any med schools. And then I applied a second time, a second year in a row. And at that point, I was 28. I'm being like, I'm getting so old. And I didn't get into any med schools. And finally, my third year, I applied again. And I applied very broadly to places I would never have, expected or thought. And I told myself, this is your last chance. Like, if you don't get in, then this is the universe telling you this wasn't for you. And so I applied to like 50 some schools and I got into one medical school, Rush Medical College in Chicago, which I'm so thrilled. I'm a great school, like so fortunate, so grateful. And just proved that you only need one. People were like, why don't you consider going to nursing school or PA? And I was like, because unfortunately, I know myself well enough to know that I like to be in charge. So that's just, and I like to be the one that's making the ultimate decision. I like to be the one that's responsible and accountable, and that's who I am. But during that time frame that I was wrapping up my yoga center. So that took like 2 years to really build it to a place where it was very autonomous. And then started taking classes and applying to school. That was like a 5-year period. So at that point, when I finally entered medical school, I had just turned 30. So again, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm so old. And I was the oldest person in my medical school class.
Really?
I was, yeah. But in that last third cycle where I applied, I had already sold my yoga center, had spent a year transitioning it, and was trying to figure out what's next. So I moved back to California and started practicing law with my mother because it was a great way to save up for med school, live kind of at home and whatnot. And that's how I started practicing intellectual property law. And it was
Okay.
very interesting. Like the intellectual property itself is, it's like the last frontier in terms of law because it's constantly shifting, especially now with AI. But it was still, even though it was the most interesting it was going to get for me in law, it still didn't float my boat. It didn't make me want to wake up in the morning and get excited about what the day had in store for me. Versus medicine has always done it for me. Even to this day, after 10 years of practice, I'm like, I cannot wait to get to the hospital and see what happened overnight with my patients and make sure everything's okay and, check in to see whether, the catheterization went well, et cetera. So, I mean, it was definitely the right choice for me.
This is an amazing journey. And it highlights to me the idea that uh, a watershed moment can really change everything for you. But it just put you on a different trajectory. It wasn't like you realized you're in law, you're practicing, you have this watershed moment, and then you're like, I'm going to be a doctor. There were like other steps that happened along the way. And you had limiting beliefs that you had to bust through related to your upbringing, to the roles of you and your brother and your family, and to the idea that it was too late. And by the way, when I started med school, I was 28. So we were similar.
We
And
would have
I
been
was
friends.
not I was not the oldest though. There was a lady in my medical school class who was like 40 and she had been a nurse for a number of years. And I think like you, she just said, and if you had like gone down one of those paths where you had done maybe another medical career, you would have probably still ended up in med school. She was like, I just really needed to have that autonomy.
Agree.
Yeah. So now you've been practicing internal medicine for a while. And what made you choose to do hospitalist medicine?
That's another good and a bit of a meandering story. So going into medical school, I was sure that I wanted to be PM&R, physical medicine rehabilitation. And for those people who don't know, physical medicine rehabilitation is the physicians that take care of people that have been through major traumas, like major car accidents and amputations, spinal cord injuries where they're left paralyzed, traumatic brain injuries, stroke. And so they usually have some kind of very significant physical limitation or disability. So, and that would say made so much sense. I had the yoga background. I loved anatomy. I loved, to help people work through injury, et cetera. So that just made so much sense to me. So from the beginning, I knew I was going to be a PM&R doctor and worked towards that and did, away rotations in it and, really just like was singularly focused with blinders on. So when I matched in my third choice, which was the number one best program in the nation, but was my third choice because of location. So I'd spent 4 years in Chicago as a medical student, and Chicago is wonderful. I am so grateful for the city and everything that it offered, but it just wasn't my personality. I'm a California girl through and through, and it just wasn't for me. So I wanted to go back to California, and there aren't a whole lot of PM&R residencies out there. So my first two choices were in California, but then my third choice was obviously going to be the number one choice, like the place I'd get the best training based on the rankings or whatever. And they liked me apparently enough to rank me high enough so that I matched with them. So that was both like exciting and disappointing. And I told myself and really believed that the universe has a plan and I have to go with it. And so I'm going to make that the best out of it. So had my intern year because everyone has to do a prelim year in general medicine before they go into their specialties. And I did my prelim year at Northwestern, where it was just so much fun. You know, like I think very few people call their intern years fun because it's absolutely exhausting. You're working crazy hours. You are at the bottom of the totem pole. You don't even have anywhere to put like your bag or your jacket. You know, it's freezing in Chicago, and I'm just like carrying my like big coat around with me during round because there's nowhere to put it.
Ugh.
You know? No one cares about you, you know? But it was so fun because the group aspect was just the perfect fit for my personality. Being able to talk things through. And I think maybe it's the lawyer behind me, right? I really like to see all sides of a perspective and think there truly is. The more we practice medicine, the more we realize that so much of it is just as much an art as it is science. And based on your experience, what you've seen and the kind of patients you've come in contact with. So I loved hearing other people's opinions and other attendings' opinions. Like even sometimes our attendings would fight over what we should do for a patient. So I really enjoyed that aspect. Plus working with like, you know, the nurses and who always taught me so much. And you know, even the clerks and the janitorial services and everyone, every single person in the hospital is working towards helping this one person, you know, regain their health and regain their life to leave the hospital. So I just loved it. So left my intern year on a complete high, having made tons of amazing friends and feeling like I learned a lot and I was ready to do exactly what I set out in medicine to do, which is be a great PM&R doctor. And so then I started residency in my PGY2 year in rehab, and it was okay, you know, especially in comparison. Emily goes, okay, I'm still practicing medicine. This is fine. But it was much more isolating, actually, which is interesting because you think of PM&R, it's still very team-based in the sense that, you know, you're working with the rehabilitation specialists, occupational, speech, physical therapy, case managers, social workers, etc. But there was a lot less of that, actually. It was a lot more like everyone has their job and everyone goes off and does their job. There's not a lot of like collaboration, at least where I was. And especially when it came to what my job was, it was like, I'm in charge of these duties and that is all. There's no changes in perspective. There's no, you know, conversation around it. So, and then it came to the point where it was like winter time and I was on like spinal cord injury. I was on traumatic brain injury and then I was on spinal cord injury. And I don't know if you've experienced cold winters, but a Chicago winter is something else.
Not a Midwest or an Eastern winter, only Western winters, and I
Yeah,
know they're different.
they're different. And
Yeah.
And the fact that like the sun wouldn't rise until 7:30 after I'd been in the hospital for 2 hours, and then the sun would set at 4:30 and be still have been in the hospital for another 3 hours. So I never saw the sun. I was taking care of people that were like, God love them, like survivors, real survivors, but the worst possible things had happened to them. And so to the point where you're like, I can't even leave my house. You know, like this poor girl was 19 years old driving to her volunteer job. She's pre-med working at senior living. And a pole fell on her car. And now she's a traumatic brain injury. Like it's those kind of stories just stick with you. And then it just piled on top of itself to the point where I was like clinically depressed. Didn't recognize myself because, you know me well enough to know, like, I'm the happiest person even I've met. I always know how to look at the bright side of things. And it was a really hard place to be. And I would come home, it'd be dark, and I would work, a 28-hour shift. I could barely get my front door closed. in my little apartment, and there's crumble on my doormat just bawling out of there wasn't anything I was crying about. It was just sadness
Mm.
that I never experienced before. And I was very, very fortunate that I had a program director that was extremely um, experienced and started to see this in me. He was like, Ingrid, are you okay? At one point, I was like, yes, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then eventually I was like, actually, can we talk? And he was like, come to my office in 20 minutes. Like, I'm here for you. And I like walked into his office. I could barely get the door closed before I started bawling. I'm like crying in front of my boss. This person is like in charge of my future. Like he can decide whether I get a fellowship or a job or whatever, you know? And he immediately handed me a tissue box and was like, we're going to get through this together. It's very, very fortunate. So long story short is, you know, I did a lot of soul searching. He told me to take a week off and go home to my family because we thought that perhaps the issue was that I was so far away from my family. And I realized that a lot of it was that I was away from California because I'd missed sunshine. And
Mhm.
so we applied to a bunch of different PM&R residencies to try to get me in, but there was no spots. And he's like, you might need to just reapply altogether to residency. It was, again, a couple weeks of soul searching. I realized that I had the best time during my tenure. Same circumstances. I was still in Chicago, you know, was still working crazy hours, but something was different. So I applied to like second year spots and to see if anyone had any spots. And I kind of applied across the board, was like anything I'll take, you know, anything kind of west of the Mississippi. And I was very, very lucky that there was a spot at Script Screen here in San Diego where I'd lived before I went to med school. I lived here for 2 years before I went to med school. I was practicing law. And, you know, it worked out so well. I'm not saying the transition wasn't easy because we're being thrown back into a PGY 2 year in medicine after doing, you know, PM&R for a year. It was definitely a challenging transition, as a lot of transitions are. But then in the end, it made so much sense. And even when I was applying to jobs out of my residency, I was like, maybe I'll go do, you know, Doctors Without Borders or, you know, anything, locums, etc. And this job kind of came up. A friend mentioned it, said he'd gotten a job there. I got referred here. And I didn't even get the job right away. They're just like, you seem great. You seem very qualified, but we are kind of full up now. So why don't you come on as per diem? And I was like, sure. And then within like a couple of months, they're like, will you come in as full time? So the reason why I said what introduced the story, like it was kind of meandering, is that it was a lot of sort of like poking and seeing what was going to jiggle, you know, and um, trusting and believing in myself and my journey and what my body and my heart was telling me, less than my brain, because it was really hard to think about leaving like the number one PM&R program in the world where, you know, when I matched there, a friend called me and he's like, amazing, Ingrid, you're going to be the president of AA PM&R one day. And I was like, I don't want that.
No.
That doesn't sound like me. But it really was the kind of thing where, you know, when you trust the journey, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't scary a lot of times, but, you know, in some ways I had worked so hard. I knew that the journey was going to come and end at a destination that, you know, was the right place for me.
This brings up another takeaway that I often have, which is that there are certain people along our journeys. I mean, this whole thing is just reminding me of a hero's journey. I mean, we're all on one, you know, and you're the hero in your own life. And it's cycles, it's different journeys. But the mentors that come along in the journey, and you mentioned having a very understanding and very knowledgeable and forthright program director. And I have to tell you, this is another way that we have a parallel similarity, is that when I had a lot of issues that really were culminating as a full-blown medical problem that I didn't know that I had, I went into my program director's office crying. He handed me a tissue. And, you know, it wasn't what you hear from some people where it's just like a flat response, like, what are you doing? It was like, here's a tissue and take some FMLA and don't quit.
No.
And my question related to that is what did you tap into internally to realize you said you did some soul searching that what you needed was really this other team type of an environment, like a more internal medicine type of environment than the PM&R. What kind of things did you do to figure that out?
Hmm. Well, again, it wasn't a straight and narrow, like, oh, a light bulb moment. I think
Mhm.
I did a lot of therapy. I was very fortunate to find a therapist that honestly changed my life in that at that time of my life. Um, I read I was meditating a lot and I was reading a lot of meditation books, like sort of self-realization type of meditation books. I think about yoga and how much it changed my life in many ways because when I found it, I was like, oh my God, I can feel this good. I never thought that I could feel this good in my body. And it's these embodiment practices that can really get you in touch with your truest and highest self. So at the time, the meditation was its own embodiment practice for me. And it was very interesting because during that time, I was also going through a breakup. So that was part of my sorrow. But I didn't mention it because to me, it was almost like it was just a little side story. And it was never about him and that relationship. It was always about me and the journey I was on. And the therapy was very much centered around the breakup and, how could this happen? And am I worthy of love? And what did I do wrong? And when you look back on it, you realize that the questions were always about your own capacity for love and your own worthiness of love. So to answer your question, I think I was learning in that moment to best love myself and to best be in relationship with myself in a way that was gentle and loving and vulnerable and kind and forgiving. That in that process and in the journey of learning that and learning to provide that for myself, I was also learning about myself, about the things that I was good at and the things that I like to do, and the ways in which I can best manifest my natural abilities and the skills that I'd acquired. And through that, the outcome on the other side of the tunnel was, wow, I loved my intern year. Like, how did it never occur to me? And it was so funny because it took me months to get to that realization. I was just still blinders on. Here's my path. This is what I've been wanting for, you know, better half of a decade. So why would I change anything? So it really was that process of learning to love myself and getting to know myself.
I love that answer so much. And you brought up some things that I want to shift to talking about now because although I love hearing all of the things that you have done, I also know that there's this whole other aspect to your life. You publish articles, you have written books, you do tons of yoga teaching now, and not just teaching locally, but doing retreats. You offer several retreats a year. So, talk a little bit about that side of your life and why you decided to do the travel retreats, which I know take a tremendous amount of your time, but I'm sure are very fulfilling and add to all of the self knowledge and the mindfulness and the things that really do make us better people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. What I'll say is that during that time in my life that I was transitioning to internal medicine, read this one book over and over again, and it's by Michael Singer. It's called The Untethered Soul. I mean, I've read it so many times I can probably quote pages to you. And that was a very important part of my self discovery. He's also written another book, pretty much a biography, where he talks about how large, vast, and old the universe is, millions of years old. And here we are being like, well, I'm going to tell the universe how this is going to go. And it was such an enlightening moment for me as well, because I was like, yeah, here I am every single moment of my life being like, this is what's going to happen and this is how I'm going to manifest it. When the truth is, I have no control over any of it. And if you look at my life, so much has happened just in the universe, sort of like peeking a little window open and saying, would you like to open this? or peeking a little door open and saying, would you like to walk through it? But you have to recognize the little sliver of light, and you have to pull the door open. But we're keeping that door ajar for you. So the way that I have started to really practice opening up to opportunities is acknowledging that the universe has a plan and not trying to make it happen my way. So a lot of the way that my life has occurred has been doors opening and sort of meandering through the hallways. So to answer that question is, I started doing the retreats because, when I owned my yoga center, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be a legit yoga teacher, then I just should do retreats. So I started thinking about them and planning them, and didn't really start doing them until I was close to the end of medical school because it was very busy. So that was like sort of the timing. So I started planning them and then didn't really execute until I was in close to the end of my residency. So it'd been a dream that I held for a decade plus. And they started to take a life of their own because people enjoyed them and started coming to them, and I think really appreciated my authenticity around it. I still remember my first retreat that I did. I was like, we're doing, hardcore vinyasa twice a day, and we're getting up at 6 a.m. to meditate. And, like, this is where our diet's going to be, and there's not going to be any alcohol. And I realized, like, I don't want to live like that either. I don't want to vacation and retreat like that. That's not what what I'm about or what I'm interested in doing. So people have alcohol, people, enjoy, people will sleep in if they want to skip yoga. And I'm perfectly happy with that because I really want to encourage people to listen to themselves and their bodies. Similarly in the way that I learned and lived within my body, and learned about myself in that manner. So just being a little kinder and easier, more forgiving. So I started doing that, but then, as you know, I've started to do a lot more longevity medicine. And I shouldn't call it medicine because I don't think there's a practice of longevity medicine yet because there's no guidelines, there's no standards of care, et cetera. But I'm starting to guide my patients and clients more through the longevity science and practices. And that was natural, but not, because I had been doing these retreats. They were doing really well. And I had always wanted to go to the Six Senses Ibiza because I've gone to the Six Senses Turkey and it was beautiful. And they have a big challenge of these retreats is finding the wellness space with the equipment that we need. So there's plenty of beautiful hotels in the world and exotic, exciting places. But if you really want to make it a true wellness retreat, then you need to have a wellness space, not just like a spa. So Six Senses has that, which was nice. And then Ibiza was like one of those things where you're just like, Ibiza, am I like pretty enough and sexy enough to go there?
Yeah.
And so when they were like, sure, we believe in you, we trust your reputation, come and do a retreat. And I was talking to the person that was managing it. And before our conversation, I'd looked him up on LinkedIn, and he had this little tag around his picture profile that said, we're hiring. And I read the description and I was like, I'm your girl. Like this is perfect for me. I, was the main doctor at a holistic health clinic here in San Diego, and I can help you build this program out and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, that's great. You don't have a medical license here, so you can't do that. I was like, okay. But then he was like, but you are wonderful. Like if you want, you can come and you can do some lifestyle, consultations with our clients. It'd be supervised by the physician who is licensed here. That would be interesting. So I pivoted and, changed my flight. I went a month earlier and spent a month in Ibiza at this clinic, where they like put me up in this gorgeous little farm. It was like out of nowhere. It was just so lovely and quiet. And started really getting interested in longevity, and ways in which you can really help people optimize their life. It's kind of like lifestyle medicine repackaged because there are a lot of little toys and things, and that's fun to do. But I consider them the gateway drug to like lifestyle medicine.
Yeah.
So a lot of my retreats now, they started out as yoga retreats. They shifted more to wellness retreats because I started, getting more modalities under my belt, Reiki and sound bathing and restorative and lots of different types of movement modalities and embodiment modalities. And now they're shifting further into incorporating some thoughts, and sometimes there'll be talks depending on the setting. So I went back to Ibiza another time and we did some talks that people really, they were like, that was a favorite part of the retreat. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, that was new. It really was this metamorphosis of seeing what the universe planned for me and continuing to stay open and not pointing and being like, the moon, I'm going to go to the moon. And instead being like, what is this finger that's pointing to the moon? What is it about this pointer that is pushing you in that direction? Is it the moon or is it the finger pointing to the moon? And really asking myself that time and time again, what is the thing you want versus what is the thing that's meant for you? And what's the journey that you're taking to get there? And really, is that journey going to take you to a whole different destination that was meant for you in such a more authentic way?
It's beautiful. And the retreat that I went on was more yoga related and had some other offerings, like you were saying, but you were not doing them. There were some other people. And now it's very fitting for you to be learning new modalities and interjecting them into your retreats. I love that idea. So, from a practical standpoint, how do you fit in doing several retreats that are often in other countries with your hospitalist practice? What kind of arrangements do you have to make to take the time off and such?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky because the hospitalist based work is shift work. So it's usually 1 week on, 1 week off. I have an arrangement with my group where everyone's just really happy to help out. So I was just recently invited to speak on gut health and longevity in Spain in mid June, and the schedule's already done. And that week I'm scheduled to work, but three of my coworkers came together. So I asked two coworkers, like, hey, can you switch these dates with me? And then uh, an another coworker was in the room and was like, hey, I can help out too. And so part of the reason we became hospitalists is because one, we love medicine. We love the higher acuity of medicine. But then also we all love having separate lives. Like one of those people in the room is an Ironman and has done several and does marathons regularly. So he understands the importance of pursuing your passions and your interests. And another person does, cosmetic dermatology. And so a lot of our group is so supportive and makes it work for each other. And I do the same. I covered a couple of days last week, sort of randomly, which wasn't even convenient for my schedule, but I was happy to do it because I can make it work for this person that, had other things going on. So I'm very, very lucky mostly to be part of a group of amazing humans that will want to support each other in our endeavors, and can take a week or 2 weeks off at a time to create that schedule to do these amazing retreats that I feel like I get more out of than clients do.
It's funny because we go into medicine wanting to help people. And when you do some of these other outside things like yoga, like coaching, like offering retreats for people, they are helping in a totally different way. And when you have that already as part of your value system, it's so meaningful to find another way to help someone. And it's often a colleague. I mean, I know you have other physicians, obviously, like I'm a physician who went on one of your retreats, other physicians go on retreats, other attorneys and professionals and people from all walks of life. But it just is so fun to get the broad spectrum of all of our patients, but then other people that are clients. So I love that.
Great.
So a lot of people who are listening to this come to the podcast because they want to make changes. They maybe want to meander in their life a little bit, but they're afraid to, or they're not really sure what they would like to pursue, what their purpose is, what their joy activity is that they would like to add into their life. So, do you have any advice for those listening who are in that state?
Yeah, it's a great question because I tell my clients this a lot too. Think about what you're interested in and go try that. Go helpful sometimes to go on a retreat. So I explain to people like, well, on my
Mm,
retreats, you'll try a whole lot of different embodiment practices, mindfulness practices, and maybe meditation will be for you, breath work will be for you, or meditation and breath work aren't your bag, but you really like journaling. So it's nice to go to a place where you can try a lot of different things and take away from that what resonates with you. So, you don't have to do all the things and suddenly be meditating for 8 hours a day, but maybe you can stomach 10 minutes a day, because it felt so good during that time that you were on this retreat and felt so connected to nature and your heart in those moments. So that's what it usually is. My recommendation is, my opinion is that we all need mentors and teachers. And I do
Mhm.
too. I'm never, ever going to have all the knowledge I will ever need to have. I'm always going to need to continue to learn and grow. And there are teachers everywhere in the world who can bring you closer to the ways in which you can be the greatest expression of yourself. So seek out those teachers. When you meet them, hold them close, ask them. I think a lot of people are like shy. And I'd say some of my best friends in the world, I've just walked up to and been like, "You seem great. Will you be my friend?" And similarly with mentors, don't be shy and cold call people and be like, "You, the work you do is fascinating and interesting. And would you be interested in like a very easy, whatever you're willing to give me in terms of time, mentorship where I can get a better idea of what your journey looked like and how I can start to incorporate some of your thoughts and ideas into mine." Like you don't have to rebuild Rome every time.
That's great advice. Thank you, Ingrid, so much. And it's been wonderful catching up with you and learning more about you. And thanks so much for being on the show. Tell people where they can find more about you and your work.
So my website is ingridyang.com. And I'm active enough on Instagram where if you message me there, I'll be able to respond to you.
Great. Thanks again so much.
Thanks, Don.